Just coming to you guys from my office this time. Hopefully we can have some fun. We can talk about raising raising adult children. Yeah, that sounds interesting. I got my headset on, so I'm gonna look a bit robotic today, but I needed it for the to ensure that my voice was coming across and not get caught lost in the background. But we're gonna talk about raising adult children. Interesting topic. So let's get started. Hi. Let's get started. So let's talk about trying to set things up here. Let's get started. Let's talk about what we're here for. We're here to talk about raising adult children. So the first question that I would like to ask is, what went wrong? You can't re-raise someone if everything is perfect, if everything is good. So what went wrong? Did anything go wrong? If you're like me, I have 3 adult children. You see over time where you made decisions with the oldest one. I have 3 adult children. My oldest one, I was very, very stringent, and I thought that was the right way to raise my son. And then my second son, I realized how dogmatic I was with my first. So I decided to taper back with my second. And with my daughter, I realized that I tapered back too much with my second son. So with my daughter, I decided to find the middleman, and I think I did it. But my first son his personality is very rigid. Everything's got to be here now. Let's go, let's go, let's go. My second son is laid back. He's like, it is what it is. And my daughter she presents as having a balance. So when I talk about what went wrong, I can clearly point out things that I did that were negative. Let's say negative in each one of their lives. So if we can't admit that something has gone wrong, if we can't admit that something should have been done differently, then this segment would be over at this point. But let's have a self-introspect. Let's self-introspect and realize, or say to ourselves, or decide what went wrong. Okay, before we get started, we're going to talk about stages of development according to Eric Erikson. I think I said that right. The first stage is trust versus mistrust. That's from birth through age 1. A lack of this will lead to mistrust. When children when they don't have trust in their primary caregiver or who's caring for them outside their immediate surroundings, they develop a sense of mistrust, and this can take them on until the rest of their lives. The next one is anatomy versus shame and doubt, and that's from between 18 months and approximately 2 years. Success leads to feelings of autonomy. Failure results in feelings of shame and doubt. If they don't have success in this, they have a sense of shame and doubt. The next one is initiative versus guilt, preschool years between ages of 3 and 5. If initiative is dismissed or discouraged, either through criticism or control, children have a sense of guilt. This is that age when kids want to do things for themselves. If they can't do it, then their sense of discouraged either through criticism or control. You can't do it. You keep messing it up. You keep knocking things over. They have a sense of guilt. The next one is industry versus inferiority. Success leads to a sense of competence, and failure results in feelings of inferiority. Now, that got a little ahead of myself, the last one, but this one, industry versus inferiority, this is when the kid between 5 and 12, that they want to do things for themselves. They want to prove that they can do things for themselves. If they're told that they can't do it, they keep messing up. A 5-year-old is not going to clean the dishes like a 12-year-old or like a parent. But if they go in there and clean the dishes, I'm sure they did something right. When they're ridiculed or told that it's not the proper way, and which is quite different from them slacking off, If they're not encouraged, they will start to have a sense of inferiority complex. The next one is identity versus role confusion. Success leads to a sense of competence. According to Erikson, it is important to process to form a strong identity and developing a sense of direction in life. This is when you have an idea of what you're good at, what you can do, how you're going to maneuver through life. The next one is intimacy versus isolation. And that is, during this period, the major conflict centers on forming intimate, long, loving relationships with other people. Success leads to strong relationships, while failure results in loneliness and isolation. That's intimacy versus isolation. That's between the ages of 19 and 40. If you think about the developmental stage of between 19 and 40, that's also the time when children start to spread their wings. If they can't identify or find love on their own, or find a place, or find a corner or a pocket of society that they belong to, they have a sense of isolation. The next one is, I can never pronounce that word, generativity versus stagnation. Success leads to feelings of usefulness and accomplishment, while failure results in shallow involvement in the world. And that's between the ages of 40 and 65. You start to feel like I did something with my life. I made some nice moves. I made some accomplishments. And failure results in shallow involvement in the world. People kind of disassociate or pull back from the world at this stage if they don't feel they've made an impact on their lives. On society. Ego, integrity versus despair. This is that last stage where you start to look back and see what did you actually do. What actually happened? Who has an impact on your life? Feelings, success in this stage leads to feelings of wisdom and like you've accomplished something, while failure results in regret, bitterness, and despair. Now, I wanted to talk about the stages of development because it's going to be important to look at both of those, for the parent and the child, as we move forward in re-raising adult children. So let's finish this. Consider this when you're trying to, or when you consider yourself re-raising, and that's what we titled this piece, Re-Raising Adult Children. Consider that the stage of development that they're in, and then consider the stage of development that you're in. Because as children develop, so do adults. Now, if you remember the layout that I gave, that was all the way up until past 65. Somewhere on that spectrum you fall, and somewhere on that spectrum they fall. Now, they're in a position where they're trying to find their position. They're trying to find a sense of belonging, love, and connectedness to people outside of their family. And you're at a position where you're in a stage where you're trying to identify what kind of impact you've had on your life. That can be a conflict. It can be a conflict because, the closest people that we look for to see if we have an impact on our lives are our children, to see what their lives look like. And many of us look at their lives to see the reflection of ourselves. Now, that can be a good thing and a positive thing and a negative thing. So consider where they are on the spectrum, and consider where you are on the spectrum. And then consider that are your positions opposing. If they want to buy a new car with an interest rate of 29.9%, now as adults, you may consider that is not a good deal. As a 19, 20-year-old, 24, 25-year-old, and it's the ideal car or the car that they want at the time, and they can't see that past that 29%, then consider the opposing views. Now, if you are more like most parents, you go to them, you tell them, this is what my position is, this is what I think, this is not a good idea, this is not a good deal, and they insist on purchasing that vehicle. And sometimes we have to step back. I would definitely try to persuade them to walk away from that. I would definitely give my all to try to persuade them from doing that. But if they're insistent, after I've pulled out all the stops, I've called all the people that I know that have an influence on their lives, and they still are insistent on walking in that path, then at some point I'm going to have to walk away. Your child is an emerging adult on a quest to prove that they are competent, successful, and have life together. Are you reminding them that they don't? Keep that in mind. Consider, because sometimes we remember our children from the things that they did, and not who they are or who they're trying to be. Just consider that. This part right here is a continuation of the last part. Your influence. In our minds, our influence, our personal influence of what we have, the influence that we have on people, sometimes it can be in our minds greater than what it actually is. Now, your influence may be contingent on how they view you. Think about how valuable the information that you receive from people that you really don't have a high opinion of. I know that's difficult to believe, and that's hard to believe for many of us. But sometimes our children don't think of us the way that we think of ourselves. Be prepared to accept that they may think of you in a different way. And be prepared to accept that even though you have their best interests at heart, even though you want the best for them, your advice may not be the best. Consider that. Keep in mind that you will disagree. But as when they were younger, it was easy for us to say that we had the final say, so we had the last words. But in their lives, your children have the last word, and we have to be okay with that. Now, the next that moves us on to, are their decisions costing us? I apologize for that. Are their decisions costing you? How much are their decisions costing you? There's nothing more discouraging and nothing more frustrating than to attempt to give someone advice. They reject your advice. They do whatever they desire to do, and then they come to you to ask them to help them fix their mess. And then, not only if it's just time or if it was just energy, that's one thing. But for that decision that they made to cost you money, I say make a decision what you're going to do. They made their decision, now you have to make yours. If you decide to help, you have to then suck it up and help. If you decide not to help, then be okay with that. Being right is subjective. That depends on what position you sit in. It could be you could be right and wrong. But be okay with whatever decision you make. And keep in mind that you have a choice. Because we're parents, because we want the best for our kids, we still have a choice as to if we're going to continue to help after they become adults when they won't listen to our advice. We do have power in this situation. And if we continue to help, many people call that enabling. To give someone something and they continue to make bad decisions or negative decisions. Many people, that can be considered enabling. So keep in mind where you sit, the message you're trying to relate, and where your children sit. I got a little ahead of myself on that last slide. This little piece of hair is just aggravating me. But anywho, what about a wrong decision? Right and wrong is subjective. I got a little ahead of myself on the last slide, but it is subjective. It depends on where you sit, who's making the right, who's calling it right or wrong. Express your concern, because at this point you're talking to an adult. You're not talking to your child, even though they act like children sometimes, but they are an adult. They are adults. Avoid telling them what they need to do. This is the biggest thing that gets people the conflict that gets people in my office, when an adult parent is telling an adult child what they need to do. even when the decision is considered a positive decision or a right decision, and we tell them what they need to do and they won't do it, it's still their choice. If their decisions bleed into your life, draw a line. You have to draw a line. Now, if you fail to draw a line and they continue to make decisions that bleed into your life, then I'm not sure who I need to direct my attention to, the bleeder or the bleedy. I'm not sure who's being bled on or who's bleeding on someone, because both are at fault at that point. Sometimes we believe that we are more important to our loved ones than we really are. Sometimes we believe that our way is the only right way. If we go back a slide, right and wrong is subjective. Imagine making a decision on what car to purchase, and you are 20 years old in 1968, or should I say, let's say 78. You're making a decision on what car to purchase in 1978. Now, if you look at the era of 1978, that was a time when I'm black and I'm proud. What's his name? James Brown. We had the Cosby shows then. There were things that were actually the atmosphere is much like it is now in 2013. But imagine being in 1978 deciding to purchase a car. Now imagine being in 2019 deciding to purchase a car. Now your decision to purchase a car, what car to buy, what everything is going to be quite different from today. Now, to say that the principles, how you use, the methods that you use to purchase your car in 1978 should be adhered to in 2013. To say that that's the only way to purchase a car, that can be asinine. Our way may not be the only right way. And my point is, even if I lost the translation with the example, my point is, because it was done one way and when you were coming up, does not mean, and even though it was successful, does not mean that that's the only way that it can get done. And if your children, especially adult children, see other things or they see other factors and they don't want to try it exactly your way, we have to be okay with that. We also have to consider that because they are our children, that we don't have to consider how we speak to them. It's one thing to tell an adult to have a seat, and then it's another thing to tell an adult to sit down. And then there's another thing to tell an adult, sit down. All three of those speak three different languages. Have a seat, sit down, sit down. Now, if you're talking to an adult, you're likely going to get more resistance with the third way. And sometimes, especially with the frustration levels of, and I keep saying we because I have 3 grown adults. My youngest child is 25 years old. And when I tell you, sometimes I want to say, sit down, because something is not connecting. It presents as something is not connecting. But I still have to keep reminding myself, Yvette, that is an adult. You cannot talk to an adult like that. You're not going to get the energy that you desire, and you're not going to get the feedback that you desire. So consider that. This next slide is really interesting. Stay in your lane. To offer advice that you're not fluent in can be more detrimental than beneficial. If you don't know, seek professional help. Ask a friend, a family, or a folk. Get somebody else involved. To give financial advice and you've not made one positive financial decision in your life, and then you offer financial advice, then consider getting someone else to speak for you. The best thing that I've ever heard someone say is, I don't have to be everything to my children. I just have to be able to point them in the right direction. If I can't do something, or if I'm unaware of something, then I have to be in a position where I can call on someone, to tap someone on the shoulder, for them to either talk to or them to either get some information from. We don't have to be everything, but we do have to be in a position, or we should want to be in a position. And if you don't, that's fine also, to point them in a direction, or to call on someone, to tap someone and say, this is who you need to speak with. To offer bad advice or negative advice can be more detrimental than offering no advice. Consider what you're saying versus what you're trying to say. If you're trying to get them to sit down, in the example that we used about 2 or 3 slides back, if you're trying to get them to sit down and you say, have a seat, that is quite different from what we just spoke about, sit down. Consider what you're trying to say versus what you're saying. Many times the message can get lost in the translation. And many times we speak with our emotions. And when our emotions are factored in, then the message is just lost. You have to try to sift through. Now that's also a wonderful way of understanding where someone is at the time when they're speaking to you. Because listen to hear their emotions, to how passionate or how hurt or how dedicated they are to any subject. You can hear that in their emotions as they speak. So try listening to your emotions. That's just a bullet point that I caught out of the other last thing. So that was a freebie. Consider what you're saying versus what you're trying to say, and see if you were telling someone else that same thing in that same manner, or if someone else was telling you that same thing in that same manner, how receptive would you be to hearing it or taking that advice? Imagine a coworker coming to you with the same circumstances that your child comes to you in, and they are the same age as your child. How would you respond? How would you relay the advice to them? If you were telling someone else that you work with or someone else's child the same information in the same circumstances, how would you relay it to them? If your answer changes based on what you say to your child and what you say to someone else, then consider yourself. But if the answer is basically the same, I do understand that we will say things to our children that we won't say to adults. And that's because we know our children. But especially when it comes to advice, give the information how you would give it to someone that was a total stranger or a coworker. Because at this point, we are likely working with people that are younger than us, or on the same age as or level as our children. So consider that. Now, if I were to sum all of this up, I would say this. Are you living your life, or are you living the story that you're telling yourself about your life? Be true to yourself. Be true to your children. You raised them, regardless of what circumstances that were present when they were coming up. It could have been a good thing, and it could have been a bad thing, or positive or negative. But keep in mind that you cannot re-raise them. You can't go back. You can't change it. You can't fix it. The only thing that you can do is build on a positive relationship at this point, and you can be there for them at this point. Now, do not confuse being there for them now with enabling them. Many parents that I find that are doing that, they consider, I wasn't there, I was working all the time, I had to make sure ends met, and now that my children are adults, I just let them do whatever, live their own life without any repercussions. That's not trained. That's not raising a child. That's just you feeling guilty, and you creating a monster. Because at some point you're going to leave this world, and when you do, you're going to leave the rest of us with the creation that you left. So, however the circumstances are, build on it. Apologize if you've made any errors, and move forward. Because that's the only thing that you really can do. Hi, my name is B. Yvette Myers. I'm a licensed counselor out of Columbia, South Carolina. I do these workshops for informational purpose so that we can see what areas in our lives that we can tighten up on. If you can't use it, slide it to the side. If you can pass it on to someone. I do these workshops once a month. They're on my website at www.betterdecisionsbetterhealth.com under the workshop tabs. I also encourage you to take advantage of our monthly newsletter. It is a small cost associated with that, but the information is invaluable. and it goes more into detail about behaviors that exacerbates mental health. I encourage you to take advantage of that. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns, feel free to reach out to me at your leisure. Thank you again for your time. I greatly appreciate it, and have a good day.